How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 1000, and in this video, we're going to take a look at multiple tropical waves and determine if they have a high chance of developing into Tropical Storm Danielle or Tropical Storm Earl or even Hurricane Danielle in the more long-term future. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at a GFS model, and we're watching several different disturbances. We have this one disturbance that's currently, you can't really see it on the GFS model map, but we do have this tropical wave that's located right just to the south of the Caribbean islands, and we do have another tropical wave located just to the southwest of the Cape Verde Islands at this time, and another tropical wave that's expected to move on up along the West African coast that could have the potential of developing into a tropical storm. So if I were to continue to move forward, here is where our first disturbance is located, right around this area, and we do see that there's a high amount of convection just to the south side, and we do see our other tropical wave just south of Puerto Rico at this time, right around Saturday, August 27th. And if I were to continue to move forward, we do see that both tropical waves maintain a decent level of organization as they continue to move on westward, as we do see an enhanced area of convection right around Jamaica, right just south of the Caribbean islands. So we are seeing maybe just enough convection to where Tropical Storm Danielle or Tropical Storm Earl could form within the next 5 days. At this point, I will say that the chance between now and 5 days from now is currently low, but there's certainly a possibility we could see that chance rise beyond the 5-day mark if the computer models were to detect that the conditions could become more favorable into next week, and the National Hurricane Center also could detect that the conditions could become more favorable by next week. So if I were to continue to move forward, let's move beyond the 120-hour mark, and it gets very concerning when we take a look at the GFS model, because we do see that the SOPR system begins to deepen. At this point, I'd almost consider it tropical storm status at this point, as we do see a decent amount of rotation around center circulation, and the pressure is low enough for the winds to increase to maybe around a 40-mile-per-hour range to be considered tropical storm status. So this would almost be considered tropical storm status, if not on the low end of tropical storm status. And if I were to continue to move even beyond that, we see that this low pressure system deepens quite a bit, and we see another tropical wave come off the West African coast as well. And if I were to move on into the more long-term future, we see a very scary scenario where we easily see a major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico right around Labor Day weekend, which would be certainly the worst case scenario for the coast of Mexico and Texas. But I'm going 10 days out, so there's still a lot of time to iron out the forecast, as there's still questions regarding how the conditions will play out right around the Caribbean and the main Davao region to really determine if these two or three tropical waves will develop into our next tropical storm. Now, taking a look at first the relative humidity in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. If we were to first take a look at the main Davao region, so what's been good over the past several weeks is that the amount of stable air that's been dominating a lot of the main Davao region, which has been preventing a high amount of tropical waves from developing, and it seems like the GFS model is sort of leaning to that happening for over the next 5 days as well, because we do see that this tropical wave is located just to the southwest of the Cape Verde Islands, but we do see that eventually the dry air becomes too much for this tropical wave to handle, and as a result, this tropical wave sort of fizzles out, or this well-defined center of circulation sort of fizzles out in the midst of the dry air, as there just isn't enough convection to deepen the center of circulation to where a high level of rotation could occur for this to have a high possibility of developing into Tropical Storm Danielle or Tropical Storm Earl, as we continue to see that dry air continue to move further southward. However, the European model is taking a little bit of a different approach, where the European model isn't expecting as much dry air to move as far south, and we see that by as early as the 90-hour mark, we do see a well-defined low pressure system still that's moving westward and hasn't really fizzled out yet. So since there's a high a margin of error between these two computer models, and there's very different scenarios at this point between two computer models. The uncertainty is definitely higher regarding the fate of this tropical wave, because will this take the European model's approach, or will we see more of a GFS model approach where this first tropical wave at least does pretty much fizzle out? We're just going to need to wait and see how much dry air will move further south to really determine if this tropical wave will have a high possibility of developing. But for now, it seems highly uncertain, with both of the two main computer models completely disagreeing regarding the fate of this next tropical wave. And if I were to take a look at the Caribbean, for which is our other tropical disturbance we're watching, we do see that there's a decent amount of dry air just to the north of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. And while there is a decent amount of moist air right around the Caribbean, isn't that extremely highly concentrated amount of humidity over the Caribbean for a high level of convection to occur? Because we do see that the area of convection is very weak and the humidity is fairly low, and we do see that the European model, unlike the GFS model, over the next 10 days isn't developing anything close to a hurricane, let alone a tropical storm in the Caribbean, as it doesn't expect that high level of humidity to exist right around the Caribbean. So as a result, the European model isn't really developing much of anything, while if we were to take a look at the GFS model, it's a strongly different approach where we see a high level of moisture, a high level of convection. So as a result, this whole pressure system has an open area to where all that energy could converge and create a high level of convection for the air pressure to lower along the surface, and of course for the wind speed and rotation to increase, for this to develop eventually into a tropical storm. Not really within the 5-day time frame, but potentially beyond that, where we do see this low pressure deepen quite a bit as it continues its trek on northwestward into the Gulf of Mexico. So a lot of uncertainty. We're just going to need to wait and see how much moisture exactly will move into the Caribbean. Will it be as much moisture as a GFS model, or will we see a little bit less moisture like the European model is saying? We're just going to need to wait and see. However, with the GFS model, there is another disturbance we're going to need to watch into next week, almost approaching Labor Day weekend, where we do see that a little bit further north of the Cape Verde Islands, another low pressure system comes off the West African coast. Now, it does have quite a bit of moisture behind it, but we do see that since it's a little bit further northward, there's going to be a couple of inhibiting factors with this tropical wave. Because for one thing is that it's going to deal with a lot more dry air if it were to move further northward, which will make it more difficult to develop. But also it'll interact more with the cooler waters that are just north of the Cape Verde Islands, so where it could potentially move into sea surf temperatures that are below 80 degrees, which is below the threshold needed for a tropical storm to develop. Now, there are some cases where a tropical storm could develop even if the sea surf temperatures aren't, let's say, above 80 degrees, but it's definitely a lot more difficult, as there just isn't enough latent heat and energy to support for a high enough level of convection for the air pressure to lower along the surface and for the wind speed to increase. So it would be a little bit more difficult if this were taken further northward track, like the GFS model and the European model are leaning towards. But it seems more likely at this point it'll be just north of the Cape Verde Islands. But we're just gonna need to wait and see how this ridge maneuvers itself over the next several days. So pretty much, to summarize, there's still a pretty high level of uncertainty regarding both current tropical disturbances in the Atlantic, as we're just going to need to wait and see really how much stable air there will be in the Caribbean and the main developed region over the next week to really determine if this does have a high chance of developing. If the weather maneuvers itself to the point where it's leaning more towards the GFS model scenario, where there's more humidity in the Caribbean and a little bit more dry air in the main developed region, then we could expect a much higher chance of a tropical storm right around the Caribbean and much less of a chance of a tropical storm in the main developed region as a result of a enhanced amount of dry air, but we're just going to need to wait and see. Wind shear will also be another thing we're going to need to pay close attention to, because while for the most part the tropical waves will likely be under an area where the wind shear will be just light enough to where this could potentially develop. It won't be extremely light to the point where it'll necessarily avoid all types of it won't entirely avoid the stronger upper level winds, because we do see that while this low pressure system will be in an area right around where an upper level low is located, where the upper level winds will be relatively light, we do see that just to the south and just to the north of this low pressure system, the wind shear is quite strong. So if this low pressure system were to move anywhere further northward or southward, then it could potentially just disorganize, and we won't see a high possibility of tropical storm Danielle. And we also could say the same with this tropical wave moving through the main Devon region, because we do see a strong amount of wind shear as a result of the existence of an upper level low just to the north of it, and an upper level high that's just, or another upper level low that's just to the south of it. So it's gonna need to be in this fine area where the upper level winds will be just light enough to for this low pressure system to organize, but that's not a guarantee either, as we're going to need to pay close attention to the exact track and the amount of stable air of these two tropical disturbances to really determine if this does have a high possibility of developing. So we're just going to need to wait and see. Now, taking a look at the current water vapor imagery, we do see quite a bit of dry air in the Caribbean, which would be an inhibiting factor. We're going to need to pay close attention to that over the next several days. And taking a look at the 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook, while the chance is low, I still want to emphasize that it could rise beyond the 5-day mark, especially with the GFS model wanting to develop a tropical storm in the Caribbean beyond the 5-day mark. So we could see that chance inevitably rise beyond over the next several days if the computer models continue to persist that a tropical wave could develop beyond the 5-day mark. So we're just going to need to wait and see. Now, taking a look at what some members are saying with the GFS model, this over the next week or so, we do see that here's our first tropical wave, and we do see a decent amount of some members wanting to develop this to tropical storm status. And this second tropical wave, we do see that some do want to develop it into tropical storm status as well. And we could say the same for this tropical disturbance right here, where we do see a decent amount of computer models wanting to increase the max wind speed to where this could be considered tropical storm status. So we're just going to need to wait and see. Moving beyond that hour point, maybe to the 240 hour mark, we do see a decent amount. There are at least some scenarios where not only a tropical storm could develop, but potentially a hurricane with this next tropical wave moving through. So we can't rule out the possibility of a tropical storm or hurricane, despite the current chance of tropical storm development being low, because of course beyond the 5-day mark we could see that chance increase. So I want to emphasize that to keep you guys aware of that possibility. Now, I'm taking a look at my current forecast regarding the potential for tropical storm Danielle or Earl. You see that I'm listing 3 tropical disturbances that have that possibility. I'm stating a hurricane is possible with this tropical disturbance right here with the GFS model, and the ensemble members with some models taking this to hurricane status. We're just going to need to wait and see. And we do have 2 possibilities of tropical storm Danielle with these 2 tropical disturbances coming off the African coast. So we're just going to need to wait and see. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content, and I hope you guys all have a great day.